Hello and welcome to State of the Builder at Scale, Hustle to Flow. Today we are talking about environmental pressures. We've identified six major environmental pressures affecting founders, and each week we're going to really focus on that particular pressure. And this week we're looking at what happens when there is more visibility but less clarity. So, and this is particularly important because we're doing more and we're busier and we're putting more content out and doing all these things. But if people don't recognize what we're doing and what we stand for, then a lot of that effort is for naught. So, this is what we're talking, this is the pressure we're talking about today. So, I'm ahead of myself. So, this is what happens when the business is easier to see and harder to remember. You're in more places, you do more posts, and people may say, wow, I met this person, this guy or this gal, and they seem really nice, and I'd like to do business, but, I really don't know exactly what they do or how they can help me. And you're asking the same questions like, oh my gosh, I went out, I've been doing all this activity. Why aren't people having a clear business of what my clear picture of what my business is for? This is what we're exploring today, this pressure. So, from a founder perspective, you have a feeling like, wait, I'm doing this. I don't understand why people don't get it. It's like they don't get what I'm sending out. Why is that, right? And they may be watching, they're reacting, they're engaging, but each time you have to explain yourself, it just shows that the clarity is not there. Okay? You feel visible but not clearly understood. When we talk about the the signal splitting, the issue is not always silence. The issue can be that sometimes it's spreading on too many different directions. So, um, in this case, some people remember pieces of what you're about, but everyone doesn't really have a focused understanding of what it is, the message that you're putting out into the marketplace. So, when we see this as founders, what do? We do more. We do more posting, we do more content, we go to more events, we do more networking. I mean, we're busy, right? Especially if you're looking to scale. And so this natural move does not it brings more activity, but not necessarily more clarity. Okay. Even though we're adding more output. So here is the pressure. It's not just visibility, it's readability. It is, can they read through or identify quickly what it is that you bring to the table? And are they really understanding what matters, what you want them to understand that matters, right? When we talk about the output tension, that is how we're always wanting to do more. And we think that more output solves the problem, but it really can't solve the problem, because if it's understanding and readability, then more volume and more output just contributes to um, more density of that non readability, right? That makes sense. So it can help visibility, but it makes recognition harder, because if it's not consistent, um, if the information that's going out to the market is not consistent, then spreading out into different directions is not going to make it clear. It could, in fact, result in it being diluted, right? So, attention versus signal. Okay. Being noticed is not the same thing as being understood. And I think that this is something that, oh, a hair in my ear, doing that online. That is, being understood is one of the reasons why we can do more, and we are often wondering and feeling like something feels off because we're doing more and we think that we're clear, but we're still not understood. So people can be giving us attention. They're looking at your content. They are they're noticing, maybe they're engaging, but attention is not the same as signal, right? Because signal places us towards movement, which is what we're looking to accomplish. Okay. Now, from the outside, everything can look clear, but the demand is not, how do I say this? Even though visibility is happening, demand is not really forming as expected, right? So if you are moving the content and you're making the connections and having the conversations, just because you're engaging in that activity does not mean that there is more clarity around what you represent in the marketplace. So everything can look like it's moving and look alive, but not really be creating demand. Okay. So how do we interpret this? So even though you're doing more, it may not be an issue about even sometimes visibility. It can be an issue that the market is not interpreting what you are putting out into the market. So it's not even the effort. It's interpretation of how they see you in the marketplace. This is why you can do so much more and still be scratching your head and wondering, well, why am I not getting the response that I'm looking for? Why am I not getting more conversations? Why am I not getting more recognition or acknowledgement that there is an understanding of what I'm actually doing? So this is one distortion that we're taking into the lab. So in this environment where we're looking at how we're getting more visibility and less clarity, there are lots of different patterns that we can look at. Behaviors, being a pattern, being a consistent behavior that we're seeing that can direct us into where we need to focus activity, right, to address a constraint. But the one pattern we're looking at that can show up inside this pressure is recognition dilution. That's one pattern out of many that we're going to be looking at. And this is when the visibility expands, but the recognition is, it doesn't expand with it. So more visibility, more activity, more connection, more events. But they say, well, you're nice, but they're not really sure how to do business with you exactly, right? That is what we're talking about today, and that's the pattern that we'll look into. Now, so even though more people are seeing you, they don't know what to call you for, right? This is one of the things when you look at, a lot of times you'll be wondering, why don't I have more referrals? Or, why aren't people calling me about a business? Man, I really had a great conversation with this person at this event, but they didn't call me. And if we trace that back, it's a good possibility that it's this pattern where they met you, but they don't really recognize what you do with enough clarity to actually know to call you or to reach out to you for whatever your product or service is. That's a real thing. And a lot of times we can't recognize it because we just figure, well, people are busy, or no one ever follows up from events, or I'm not supposed to have engagement, or whatever the question may be. But if we dig a little deeper and start noticing the patterns in our activity, very possibly that this is one of the reasons why. Okay. Now, we won't go deep into this, but mm, what this pattern looks like is the visibility basically grows faster than the recognition, right? And in some cases, I have to believe it catches up, but it has to build, right? So if the recognition is not building, then it may never catch up. And the result of that is you keep having to do the same or more activity to get recognition. And as we'll show later, recognition translates into right conversations that translate into business. Okay. So I like that line, business can become more familiar, but still not be understood. So let's talk about the location of this pattern. So the pressure is in the field, but recognition dilution is a pattern that we see in the field that we can recognize. So this looks different in different businesses, in different environments. But at the end of the day, what we're looking at this week is going to be recognition dilution, because we're going to do a deep dive and really understand what the mechanisms are, add some numbers, and look at some proof of how it actually affects your revenue. We're going to do the math. Show me the math, right? Okay. Now, revenue repeats, which is all what we're about, turn growing pains into repeatable revenue. Revenue repeats when you have signal. And the business has to be recognizable, not just one time, but more than once, multiple times, because you want to build and compound that recognition so people know exactly what they connect with you for. Okay? So for revenue, I'm just going to read this. For revenue to become more repeatable, the market has to understand the signal well enough to act on it more than once. Okay? Repeatable revenue needs a signal that it can recognize again and again. All right. Visibility strain. So if visibility increases and it doesn't compound, then what the result that winds up happening is that you as a founder have to do more activity for the same level of results or less, because it's diluting. Okay? And the other kind of side of that is, not only are you doing more activity, but the way you know you haven't hit the mark on it yet is you're doing more explaining, you're providing more examples. It's a lot more work, and it's cognitive work because you're very connected to it, but others are trying to connect the dots and figure it out. That's an indicator. And that's an indicator of how the visibility without recognition causes strain, because now not only are you doing more activity, you're also doing more explaining. Okay? Let's talk about the patterns. So I started to do this in the beginning, and I did not follow my tell them what you're going to tell them what you tell them, and tell them what you told them. But so I should step back. So first we went back, we went over and talked about the environment, and we even identified a spotlight pattern of what we can look and see in the environment as a founder that's affecting how we're able to have recognition in the marketplace. Now, what we're doing at this stage in this room is identifying the mechanisms that allow us to identify the patterns and be able to focus our attention into those activities that create movement. Okay, movement. So, when we talk about the archetypes, these are patterns that show how the business is behaving. Okay, and these appear when the strain that's happening is occurring on a recurring basis. It establishes a pattern. That pattern gives us a way to see where this constraint or the strain is located so we can do something about it. Okay. And then we don't have to guess from surface activity. We don't have to just look at our business and go, man, okay, I wonder why this is happening. If we can identify a pattern, we don't have to guess, and we don't have to rely on third parties who don't know as much about our business, don't have the context. We can actually see a pattern and be empowered to identify what the likely next step would be. Now, this allows us, so the pattern allows us to see the movement in the system, okay? It's helping us to see behavior in the system. You have to have a system, right? And so a visibility problem doesn't just remain in demand. It moves throughout the entire revenue system, right? So just because, so you may think it's in one place, but it can affect demand, it can affect conversion, it can affect capacity and cash. It's not limited just to demand, okay? When recognition is unclear, then you compensate other places in the system. You make decisions other places in the system. So we have to pay attention to movement, right? And attention has to become movement, I should say. So movement, this is what movement looks like: inquiry, conversations, decisions, or some other next step. That's what movement is, right? So it's not someone likes a post, or you have impressions, or you have tons of people come to an event, or whatever activity you use for demand generation. It's not that. Movement is about those activities that are moving those connections through a process that will lead to discovery and being able to help them solve a problem that exists that you can solve. Okay? If movement doesn't happen, visibility may be present, but demand will still be unstable. Okay? So we know that visibility can increase and we still not have demand. We know that we can see patterns that will help us identify, where the visibility is not happening, or where the recognition is not happening. Okay, so we know that. We also understand that when there is visibility without recognition or without movement, it can show up in all areas of the revenue system. So now we're looking at, if that's true, which it is, then where is the break? How do we identify where it's broken so we know where to fix? So if the market isn't, I like this slide because it shows the nuance of how you can look at a deeper level around what's actually happening in your business And it's very different. So when we look at this, so is the market not recognizing the problem, or is it not connecting the business to the problem, or is it not remembering the business at the right time? Those are different breaks with different potential solutions, right? So we have to identify the break location. The signal is not moving. That's the question, is where is the break? So I get excited. Now I'm talking too much. Okay. So that's why we need a doctrine. That's why we diagnose before we deploy, because if we deploy a solution or a strategy or a tool or a task, whatever it is, and we haven't diagnosed the location of the break, it can make matters worse. It doesn't automatically mean clarity. It can mean less clarity. And so we always want to look at the activity before we always want to identify where the break is before we move forward and fix something. And misdiagnosis can be very expensive and can amplify the blurriness of the blurriness. Okay. So how do we do this? We know we need to identify the break. We know we want to diagnose before we deploy, because we want to make sure that we're focused on the right things and our resources are going to the right place. So how do we do that, Jewel? How do we do that? We do that with a diagnostic sequence. So, and this is just high level because, again, this particular room is for orientation, right? This sequence keeps you from, one, reacting too quickly, and two, guessing. And I guess I could add a three and say misdiagnosing, which can be costly. So we recognize the pattern, we locate the pattern, we prove the constraint, right? So first, we recognize the pressure field. Like, what is the environment we're operating in? We're looking this week at more visibility, but less clarity. Then we locate the pattern showing up inside it. We look at what's happening in our business and we go, oh, you know what? I think our recognition is not what it used to be. And then we prove that constraint before we decide to make a change. So we don't just go, okay, I think it's that one. No, we actually look at that particular constraint that we think it is, we believe it is based on the pattern, and then we quantify and confirm that that's a constraint before taking action. So that's the reason we have the lab. So Hustle to Flow is orientation, where we talk about the environment and the potential patterns and what happens in the environment, and how to look at it and how to diagnose and how to make the right choices. In the lab, the lab is the show me platform, the show me room, right? So in the lab is where we actually go through and prove out the math, the financial implications of this particular distortion. And it gives us a feel. This gives us the overview, right? This is an orientation space. When we're not trying to prove anything here, we're just adding awareness on the environment and potential pattern behaviors that you can see. But we're really going to pick a spotlight. We've picked recognition dilution as a spotlight pattern that we're going to go deep on and prove in Profit Visibility Lab on Tuesday. Okay? That's the deep dive. Now, one of the things I want to just clarify is that, again, we look at the environmental pressure first, because one, that's what you care about, right? That's what you care about. You're existing in an environment and you're trying to operate in that environment and build your business. So we have to look at the environment. But then within that environment, What are we seeing? What type of patterns can we recognize in our business as a founder so we can be more sovereign in the way we're running that business and not as dependent on outside um, outside advisors who may not immediately have the context necessary, right? We want to have some sovereignty. And the way we do that is to be able to recognize these patterns. The other reason that we look at the environment is because it keeps the pattern in context. So if you just take the pattern and pull it out of the air, it may not make sense. But when you look at the environment and you see what's happening and you see the pattern, then you can make that connection. Okay. So what's next? If visibility is not becoming recognition, so you're out there, you're putting, you're out there, you're meeting people, you're connecting. If it's not becoming recognition, and we have, a quantifiable way to identify that in the lab, we'll cover that, then more visibility is not going to fix it, right? If you're out there and you're doing more and you still don't have it, more visibility, not going to fix it. That was worth repeating. It's basically just create more places for it to be blurry, more connections that aren't coming through. You have these conversations where you're like, oh my gosh, I thought for sure we had a connection. And you're curious as to why things didn't move forward. Might be here. Okay. This is why we cannot move based on activity alone. Now, this is something I encourage you to reflect on. Because I would sit with this, because more visibility does not really mean being more understood. Are people seeing more of you, or are people really understanding you better and what you do? Right? So, in the lab, we'll break this all down in Profit Visibility Lab next week on Tuesday. We're going to take a look at what happens when visibility increases but the clarity weakens. And we actually will examine that in the light of movement. And we have a way to measure movement where we can quantify these activities, right? So that we can really take an active role in moving the needle of movement. So that's what we're covering next Tuesday on in the lab, in the Profit Visibility Lab. So to wrap things up, more visible does not mean more understood. And if the business is you feel like your business is becoming easier to see because you're out there more, but it's still harder to understand. You're doing too much explaining, too many examples. People aren't really getting what you do. Then that's where recognition is breaking. That is where recognition is breaking. So with that, we're going to wrap this session of Hustle to Flow up, and we will see you, hopefully, at Profit Visibility Lab on Tuesday. Until next time.